days that he's joined us as head of volunteering. I'm not going to chuck him in at the deep end today, but welcome, James. I'm sure you'll get to know everyone really well over the coming weeks. I don't know whether you wanted to introduce yourself, wave, and hopefully you'll pop up on everyone's screen.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all.
Brilliant, thank you. So James joins us from British Heart Foundation. Actually, has got huge experience in volunteering, so it's really great to welcome here in Somerset. A bit of housekeeping then, as I mentioned about the mute, that would be great if you could mute yourselves while we're doing this initial conversations. And then the other thing I just wanted to say that was that we're going to be recording this as well. So if you don't want to be featured, then please do turn your cameras off. But as I say, there are quite a number of people who really want to watch this, that we want to share this with afterwards. So we do need to record it. Okay, so without any further ado, we'll get started then. So why are we here? So as I've said, we're all passionate about volunteering, and I think it's fair to say that we've got an incredibly strong culture of volunteering in Somerset. I mean, we really do. And I think that was so evident. It kind of really was brought into sharp relief for us all during COVID, where I was in regional and national conversations in other areas where they were simply having to find volunteers to help out. And in Somerset, it has started, it was happening, it was already happening. So there's such a culture of it, a really long history of it, and a real culture of kind of helping your neighbour and working in communities, which is really great. Did someone just say something? No? Sorry. Okay, but I think what we need to recognise is that there are huge pressures at the moment, and challenges do exist, and I think there's a need for us to take a much more joined up approach. We can't leave it to chance, essentially. And I think for those who've worked with Spark over the last few years, feedback from the Reflect, Recover, Renew work that we did a few years ago, and also the recent state of the sector, really shows that. And there's a real kind of call from many of you that you want to be more joined up about this. It's not about us all working in our individual organisations and managing our volunteers. I think there's a real need for us to take a much more collective and collaborative approach to this if we want to make sure that we've got a volunteering culture and system that's fit for purpose going forward. So what we're here to do really is to start this development of the vision. But what is this exactly, and how does the vision help? So we've got some really good starting points already. I think there's lots of ingredients for a vision that we can probably all agree on. So we need to do more to make sure volunteering is sustainable. We need to have enough volunteers who've got the skills that they're needed and who reflect the communities that we're living in. We also need volunteering opportunities and activities that are mutually beneficial. They're for the volunteering or involving organisations, and they're also for the volunteers, and it needs to meet both of those needs. We want volunteering that's rewarding. It needs to be rewarding for the individual, for the organisation, and for the community. So whether it's about strengthening neighbourhoods, whether it's about generating well-being, developing skills, or enhancing services, we need to be really clear what the benefits are. And kind of that the vision for the impact that volunteering has to be really, really strong. We need volunteering that's well run and managed. We need to have the resources that are necessary. Volunteers need to be safe, they need to feel supported, and it needs to be run well and managed effectively. And a vision can help us with all these kinds of challenges because it gives us a shared goal, and it gives us an idea of something collective that we can work towards. And I think by working together on some of these challenges to ensure that we all pull in the same direction could be hugely beneficial for us all, so that we can identify areas for focus, and also potentially I think it's for investment too. So where do we need to invest in Somerset? Where are the gaps? What are the things that we collectively need to be doing more of, and where does the investment need to go? So as we said in our invitation to you, we want to create a future where volunteering is more accessible, equitable and valued, that benefits both volunteers and the communities they serve. And I think today is very much the start of that journey, a kind of reimagining of how volunteering could look if we get it right in Somerset. And so what kind of volunteering are we talking about? And I think that's up to us really, for us to reimagine, as I've said, but all sorts. And I think given the challenges we're all facing at the moment, I think there's probably a real need for us to be much more creative about what volunteering is than we've done in the past. Certainly, formal volunteering is really, really key. It's so important. So the kind of volunteering that supports organisations across all of our sectors, to provide vital services for people in need. Of course, we need that. But I think we also need to consider less formal models too, responding to the needs of individuals who are out there, and also the needs of the services that we're running. We know that many people invest their time in communities but might not consider what they do to be volunteering, or recognise the language that we all use, or indeed engage with us as voluntary organisations. They might be volunteering but not in a kind of formal capacity working with any of our organisations, and that's okay too. We might also want to think about how we can ensure that our volunteers better reflect our communities, so that we can reach all ages and backgrounds, from the civic core, so that's the kind of older age group volunteers that we've already got. They make up the vast majority of our regular volunteers, as we'll hear about in a little while with the research findings. But we need to engage young people. We need to engage people who work full-time, and those people who don't see volunteering as an option for them, and also underrepresented groups. I mean, I could go on. And I think inclusivity is absolutely key, and there is no one single solution. And I think that's what the start of today is to start thinking about what those priorities might be for us all. And what I wanted to just talk about now is really how we've come to be doing this vision. I mean, I think as Spark Somerset, volunteering kind of is our core business. But what we've been successful in achieving a year or so ago was we were successful in receiving something called Volunteering for Health funding. So nationally, it's funded by NHS England, and we're one of 12 areas nationally. There were almost 100 applications, one of 12 areas nationally to be successful achieving this funding. And what that funding is allowing us to do, it's very much within the kind of health and social care sphere, but I think it's really important to say that actually, name me one voluntary sector organisation, one volunteer involving organisation that does not impact on health and wellbeing in some way, even if it's not their kind of core business, or, you know, it does. And so I think this does definitely apply to all of us. And the funding that we've received has allowed us to do some of the stuff that we would otherwise have struggled to do. It allows us to really invest in this work in a way that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to. And the main premise of our bid was around strategy, it was around a vision, it was about including volunteering involving organisations from right across Somerset, as I said, voluntary sector organisations, council, NHS, anyone really that's using volunteers. We want them to be part of this piece of work. The second strand of the work is we're running 2 pilots. So we've got a pilot that's already begun in Frome, and another one in the Rural Practice Network based out of the Balsam Centre in Wincanton. So if you'd like to hear more about those 2 pilots, I mean, essentially what we're doing there is testing out things that we'll then use to inform the wider vision. If you're working in those areas and would like to hear more, please do get in touch. And then finally, I just wanted to kind of clarify that although this is about health and care and well-being, this doesn't stop and start with volunteering in health and social care. We know from our work in Somerset that voluntary activity is totally cross-cutting. It underpins so much of what we all do and strengthens our communities. And that really is our message to the partners here today, to all of you. Volunteering is such a brilliant way for all of us to come together and invest in Somerset and our communities. And investment in volunteering, it really does generate considerable value. There's huge evidence of that, you know, both in terms of the individuals themselves, the organisations that they're working for, the people that they're supporting, and the communities in which they live. And so you might really say that volunteering has a quadruple bottom line. So I talked earlier about how we can highlight where the investment needs to go. This really, you know, there is evidence that it makes such a difference. It brings benefits for those volunteers that you're supporting, for the volunteers themselves, for the volunteering involving organisations, and for wider society. And I know I'm pretty biased at Spark, you know, as Chief Exec at Spark Somerset, but volunteering really is absolutely key for the resilience of our communities going forward. There are lots of challenges and demands out there in our communities, and volunteering really is part of the solution. But as I say in many of the meetings I'm in, it's not something that we can just rely on and that we can leave to chance. It really is something that we need to think about more strategically. So please do join in today. As I say, this is just the start. Please do get involved. We really want to hear from you. As we said in the invitation, a shared vision could be a really powerful framework for collaboration through volunteering, improving our systems and infrastructure, and ensuring that anyone in Somerset who wants to volunteer can make their mark and have a brilliant experience. And today is very much the start of that process. And as I mentioned before, we're really lucky to have achieved this funding. And what that has enabled us to do is to bring in some fantastic expertise from elsewhere. So I've already mentioned we've got the researchers that we're working with that we'll introduce you to in a little while. They'll be talking through some of the key findings, but also supporting us with this work. We've got Ruth and Gethin. So they're both freelance consultants who specialise in volunteering after they've had, really high-level careers in the voluntary and community sector. So Ruth, prior to freelancing and working with us at the moment in various other organisations, Ruth led the Macmillan's volunteering operations nationally. She's a published author on volunteer management. She's the chair of the Association of Volunteer Managers, and she's also co-chair of England's National Vision for Volunteering. So she knows quite a lot about it. And as does Gethin. So Gethin's with us too. So Gethin's experience in volunteering dates back to the London 2012 Legacy Programme. And since he's led national programmes for volunteering matters. And he's also worked with central government's volunteering during COVID-19. So Ruth and Gethin together have such a wealth of experience. And they also have worked together on a range of projects separate to this. So we already know how great they are when they're working together. We really are getting kind of more bang for our buck with them both. Their role here is really to work with us, with our team at Spark and with you guys to help guide us through the process of creating the vision and to bring those national insights and perspectives and experience into the process as well. So we can really make the very most of the opportunity that we have here to think differently and reimagine volunteering. So I'm going to hand over to Gethin now, who's going to run today's agenda. But thank you so much again for everyone coming. It's great to see you all. And yeah, please get stuck in today and hope you enjoy the session. Over to you, Gethin. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Catherine, and love that introduction. Thank you for that. No pressure. Ruth and I very much the Ant and Dec of volunteering. We'll do our best. Other duets are available. Thank you everyone for being here. As Catherine said, the session is for anyone that's interested in strengthening volunteering in Somerset, really. So whether you're a volunteer involving organisation and you care about your ability to engage volunteers and the sustainability of that, or whether you are a wider stakeholder that recognises some of that value that Catherine described and thinks this adds value to everything that we're trying to do as well. Either way, today's event is for you. We're going to start to develop our vision that strengthens and embeds volunteering across the county. I'm just going to take you through the agenda very briefly so you know what to expect. Today's session is divided into two parts. The good news is in the first half you can completely relax. We're just going to share some information with you. You can sit back. The Wonder research is coming. We know you've had a little bit of a briefing sent to you in advance. Perhaps you've had a chance to absorb some of that. Perhaps you haven't. It doesn't matter too much. We're going to share some of the highlights of that with you. We've got Steph and Emily coming up in a second to do that. And then we'll move from that presentation into a bit of a panel discussion where we just take a more conversational approach to some of the big themes that are coming up. And that's just going to warm us up for the discussions in the second half, really. So just pay attention this morning in this first hour. Have a think about what resonates with you from your perspectives of engaging volunteers or caring about volunteering, but also what's missing. What is it that we don't feel we know yet? What's not being reflected in this research? Who's not in the room? All of those questions are going to be relevant too. We'll take a quick comfort break around about 11 o'clock, and then in the second hour, that's where we really need your help and your insights. We're going to move into breakout groups, and we're going to explore a number of themes that Wonder will take us through in their presentation, and what we can do about them together. And again, there's not too much to think about in advance. We'll put some propositions in front of you, areas in which we might strengthen volunteering. These might be areas or themes that end up as integral to our vision, or they might be red herrings and take us off in a slightly different direction. It doesn't matter too much at this point. They're straw men, it's early days, and there's room for all sorts of ideas. So we're not going to create the whole vision today. but we will make a really great start, and we'd encourage you to be really generous with your insights and really to kind of get involved. And then, as Catherine intimated, beyond today, Ruth and I would love to go through a process with you over the summer where we catch up a bit more one-to-one or in your groups and networks, and we come and talk to you in a bit more depth about what this vision needs to do and look like and feel to meet some of the challenges or opportunities in volunteering that you've identified for yourselves. And then beyond this, we're hoping to come back together collectively in the autumn to launch the vision for a real celebration event. And if you're here today, or if you've signed up, we'll certainly make sure you get details of that kind of when it comes through. It'll be for organisations and for wider stakeholders, and crucially for volunteers as well. We really want them in the room too. So we're going to move into the presentation from Wonder now. Fear not, all slides will be shared afterwards, so don't feel the need to make copious notes or screen grab. That will kind of be coming through. If things do occur to you, and it may be a question or it may just be a thought that you've got at the moment, do please park it in the chat. Valuable resource for us facilitators. Everything that we get here today will be paid attention to. So please do park it there for us. Okay, with that out of the way, I have great pleasure in handing over to Steph and Emily from Wonder Research, who are going to give us a brilliant grounding in what we know and perhaps what we don't quite know yet about volunteering in Somerset. Steph and Emily, please, over to you.
Thank you, Gethin. Hi, everyone. Great to be here today, and thank you, Spark Somerset, for inviting us. My name's Emily Kay, and I'm joined by my colleague, Stephanie Gaydon, and we're going to talk you through some of the findings. We've just undertook a piece of research. We're at Wonder Insight. We're a small research consultancy based in the Southwest, and we're dedicated to supporting the charity sector with research, evaluation, and co-design, really aiming to amplify the voices of underserved communities. So this research is, of course, commissioned as part of the Volunteering for Health grant to explore sort of really how the volunteering system in Somerset could be sort of less fragmented and continue to flourish across communities and reduce pressure on the system to support those better kind of health and care outcomes. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this scoping phase, this research phase, is really aiming to inform the approach for the coming years, ensuring that this vision that we're talking about and these kind of upcoming solutions are evidence-based. So this research aimed to answer two key objectives. The first one, to gain a system-wide understanding of how volunteering is currently working across Somerset, so understanding the current organisational strengths and challenges at play currently in the landscape. And then the second aim being to really deep dive into individual volunteer experiences, so understanding personal volunteer journeys, motivations, drivers, barriers and challenges, and ultimately really aiming to identify the key opportunities for change and innovation to feed into this vision for volunteering. Next slide, please. So to answer these research aims, we deployed a mixed methodology designed to reach a wide range of both volunteers and organisations across Somerset. So we started off with desk research to ensure that we were building on existing knowledge and insight. And then through both doing kind of surveys as well as qualitative in-depth interviews and workshops, we heard from 255 residents of Somerset, including 194 volunteers, and the rest being kind of either lapsed or potential volunteers. So through that kind of survey and in-depth interviews captured their perspective. And then we had a survey reaching 62 volunteer involving organisations and consulted a further 60 plus organisations through doing some roundtable discussions in a kind of small online setting and also doing an in-person workshop forum event. So firstly, like just to say before we go through the findings, thank you so much to everyone who took part, took time to come to those events, to answer the survey, to share that survey with your volunteers. Your contribution is very much appreciated, and really we couldn't kind of be here without you. So thank you so much to all of those participants. So I'm going to whiz you through some headlines today. There's a lot of detail in our full report we've done, and of course we'll send these slides to you, but we're just going to pull out some really kind of key themes to sort of set up the session today and kind of give a good foundation for the workshops. So if you could go to the next slide, please. I'll start talking you through the kind of current state of play, this current landscape, how it's looking. So Firstly, there's a deep sense of pride and gratitude for volunteers across the sector. Volunteers are universally seen as essential, not optional, and many organisations describe volunteers very much as the heart of their work, emphasising how much kind of day-to-day service delivery and community connection really depends on that volunteers' time, energy and care. And of those currently volunteering, you'll see some stats here from the survey. Most volunteers surveyed have multiple roles, volunteer weekly and long term, demonstrating this real thriving community that Somerset has of volunteers currently. And while experiences naturally do vary between organisations and roles, and we will come on to share some challenges that volunteers shared, generally the volunteer feedback was extremely positive. You can see this stat here, 89% of volunteers reporting a good or very good experience in their role currently. So overall, a kind of really positive, thriving community and picture. Next slide, please. And for many volunteers, what started as a small act of giving back and helping has sort of escalated into becoming something much more meaningful and a really integral part of their identity, routine and sense of belonging. Most volunteers are driven by wanting to gain a sense of purpose, connection and well-being. Those were the kind of biggest drivers that we saw. But what we saw is that volunteering kind of sparks this cycle, this positive cycle, we've called it, of personal growth and connection, which keeps volunteers engaged and wanting to give back. And this cycle then becomes sustaining. The more people are kind of gaining from the experience, the more they're wanting to give back. So you can see how that initial volunteering role then grows into becoming multiple roles and more time and more a kind of bigger part of people's life and sense of kind of purpose and fulfillment. And I'll give an example of this. If you go to the next slide, please. Just bringing this cycle kind of to life with an example. We've changed names in our case studies for anonymity, but just tell you a little bit about Adam, who started volunteering after retiring and having gone through some really difficult personal challenges himself, losing his wife, but also having his own personal battle with cancer. Initially, Adam said to us, and just to use kind of his own words, I didn't want to sit at home all day after retiring, so I began looking for ways to stay active and make a difference. Then he found actually it was really giving him something to look forward to. So he said, it helps me stay sharp, gives you something to look forward to. But then he also found these real kind of community benefits and connection that he had through volunteering. So telling us the community I work with, especially at the hospital, has been incredibly supportive. You meet so many different people and learn so much from them. And then also kind of actually seeing how volunteering became a really integral part of his kind of routine, structure, general kind of week, but also purpose. And so he said to us, volunteering gives my life structure, purpose, and it reminds me that I can still make a difference. So it becomes so much more for him the more that he sort of got involved. Next slide, please. There are also some volunteers who are motivated by building their skills. So this was a kind of slightly different volunteer journey. And although this was a slightly smaller proportion of volunteers, we found that volunteering was working really well for them in delivering significant skills development that volunteers were looking for. So this was about a kind of 23% said they were looking to gain new skills. And an example of this was a volunteer we met called Sam, who had a significant debilitating injury that took them out of being able to work. And during their recovery, while they couldn't work, they joined blood bikes and took a remote role, which gave them both purpose, but also development in key skills like communication, logistics coordination, managing high pressure situations. And that role acted as a stepping stone into a new paid position that they just secured recently in the ambulance service. And so they shared with us just how directly applicable those skills they gained from that blood bikes position had kind of translated into this new position. So really positive outcomes that we heard around this kind of like skills development pathway. Next slide, please. So despite this really positive picture, there are some challenges that we heard about that we wanted to share with you. So 3 kind of key challenges stood out from volunteers. The first one being just volunteers' time being really stretched. As we heard, a lot of volunteers have multiple roles. They're also juggling personal commitments, balancing kind of home and kind of personal commitments alongside their volunteer roles. And they shared with us that if a role is too rigid in the demands of their time, it can make it quite stressful for them to manage and kind of sustain long term. And this was the most kind of common challenge mentioned. And another one being that if there are high demands on volunteers, kind of time, energy, but also if a role feels quite demanding emotionally, yet the support is lacking, that can lead to volunteers feeling fatigued. And 20% of volunteers told us that they had felt emotionally drained in a volunteering role. And we heard, didn't we, that well-being can be a really core motivator. So if that benefit kind of dissipates and volunteers are feeling tired in a role, that can lead to a disengagement. And finally, volunteers can feel really frustrated if their skills aren't being fully utilised. And some did share examples of where they felt that their skills or expertise hadn't been sort of acknowledged, or they didn't feel that organisations were really listening to them. And interestingly, in our organisation survey, we saw that half of organisations said they do not collect feedback from their volunteers, showing that sometimes they're not kind of listening back to that volunteer kind of experience and perspective. Now, in terms of kind of an organisation's perspective of the challenges, if you go to the next slide, please. About half of volunteer involving organisations reported having challenges with kind of 4 different areas that we asked about. So recruitment, retention, capacity to run kind of volunteer training and coordination. So about half of organisations were having challenges in those areas and others were having success in these areas, which really showed us how the landscape is quite uneven for volunteer involving organisations in terms of how easy and difficult they find it to manage and retain volunteers. Smaller organisations we found were often disproportionately struggling to recruit, retain and manage volunteers, often feeling they had like less time, infrastructure, flexibility, placing them at a disadvantage compared to those sort of larger and better resourced organisations. I'm going to hand over to Steph now to talk us through some of the kind of emerging risks on the horizon. If you could go to the next slide, please. But that's a kind of very quick high-level summary of the sort of current landscape that hopefully echoes some of what you're seeing in your organisations.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emily. Yes, so I'm going to take you through the kind of 3 emerging risks on the horizon, and then after that, the kind of opportunities for innovation and how you might address those risks that are on the horizon for the sector. So if we go to the next slide. So the first risk we identified is that organisations need more volunteers, but there lacks a kind of capacity to adequately support them. So there's a real tension here that we saw across organisations. On one hand, organisations are saying we don't have enough volunteers. 69% of organisations felt that, but over half also felt that they didn't have the ability to kind of consistently provide support and training to volunteers. And a big driver for this seems to be the kind of increasing pressure within the kind of current funding landscape. The cuts to statutory services are just putting so much pressure on so many organisations and on staff resources. And what that means is that organisations need more and more from their volunteers. They need them to serve kind of bigger and more important roles, but they're also just hugely overstretched. And the potential impact of this is that more and more volunteers will be kind of burnt out and disengaged from volunteering. And as we identified in the challenges, this is kind of starting to happen in certain ways that volunteer wellbeing is affected. The next risk we identified, on the next slide, please, is an over-reliance on the same demographic profile of ageing volunteers. So while Somerset kind of appears to have a thriving volunteer community, and in some ways you very much do, you have a kind of committed group of volunteers who are doing lots of different roles. I mean, 67% of volunteers have 2 or more roles. Actually, when you dig into the data, you find that it is the kind of same committed group that are kind of fulfilling many different roles. So it kind of looks potentially more thriving than it actually is. The other issue is that the demographic, as you would expect, tends to skew older, tends to be mainly women, tends to be more white. So there is this kind of a certain group that's really involved in volunteering, but actually within a kind of Younger demographic, for example, are much less involved in volunteering. And you can see that organisations really acknowledge that. So 43% of organisations reported that they don't think the demographics of their volunteers actually represent the community. And 63% feel more needs to be done to encourage a more kind of diverse volunteering base. So there's very much the energy for that and the need for that. And without doing that, the potential impact is that you have this kind of diminishing volunteering population and an unclear kind of pipeline for the future. The third risk, next slide please, lovely, is about this kind of lack of collaboration within the system. So half of organisations said to us that they'd never collaborated around solving problems in kind of volunteer engagement, but 53% of volunteers would like there to be more kind of collaboration amongst volunteer involving organisations. So there is this sense that there isn't as much collaboration going on as is needed, and also that there is an actual kind of appetite for collaboration. So the organisations we spoke to very much talked about wanting to collaborate, but currently things really getting in the way of that, and that's kind of structural but also attitudinal kind of barriers. So they talked about the fact that things can feel quite competitive in the sector, particularly for smaller organisations. So, you know, you're competing for the same funding, the same volunteers. Actually, that gets in the way of the ability to collaborate. There was also this kind of fragmenting between larger organisations that tend to be better resourced and smaller organisations, and that can create some kind of structural kind of inequalities within the volunteering system. And unfortunately, the potential impact of that is just this kind of growing divide and a lack of a kind of joined up approach that might help address some of the kind of other risks and challenges that we've already identified. Okay, so that's the bad news. Let's move on to the good news. So there are some really good opportunities for innovation, and we're already seeing these things kind of appearing and on the horizon, which is amazing to see. But let's go into them in a bit more detail. So innovation feels really critical to ensuring the future proofing of the volunteer pipeline and the sector success overall. And that's exactly what's happening with kind of the volunteering vision, and you're all coming together today. So it's amazing to see. But the opportunity areas where that kind of investment and thinking would be amazing will really be able to help to increase the diversity of the volunteering pool, inspire this kind of new generation to volunteer, and inspire people in a kind of much broader understanding of what volunteering can be, and also will help to kind of leverage resources across the sector. So bringing together smaller and larger organisations, and all of this not only kind of enables the sector to ensure its kind of pipeline and future health, but also will help volunteer well-being, which is so kind of critical to the overall kind of health and happiness of this kind of volunteering ecosystem. So if we go to the next slide. So we identified kind of 4 key opportunity areas for addressing the risks, and also just for really kind of enhancing the sector as a whole. And I'm going to go through each one, but we're also going to have a chance to kind of discuss these areas more in the breakout group. So I'm just going to kind of give a kind of a light overview. But the first opportunity area that we identified was around enabling collaboration between volunteer involving organisations and also with volunteers. So as we identified, there is this appetite for collaboration amongst organisations, and there seems to be a real shared appetite for things like shared infrastructure, so whether that be kind of onboarding tools or a volunteer passport. There's some appetite for kind of standardised safeguarding and training, and there's a real appetite for spaces to kind of connect and collaborate like we're doing today. So there's already energy for that. Where are the kind of opportunities to collaborate more in ways that would kind of alleviate some of the issues the sector is facing? The other part of collaboration that feels really important as an opportunity is about the sector as a whole collaborating more with volunteers. So volunteers bring such valuable insight from their kind of lived experience on the front line. They understand what's working, what's missing, they understand where systems can improve. And many of them that we spoke to are really eager to contribute their ideas and not just their time, but they need a kind of way, a structured way to do so, a way that allows them to kind of co-design with organisations solutions to kind of the most pressing issues within the sector. So this might be about kind of creating more spaces for volunteer voices. It might be kind of more structured kind of involvement, whether that be like peer networks or volunteer panels, but there certainly feels like there's an energy and opportunity for involving volunteers much more. The second opportunity area is about developing skills-focused volunteer pathways. So as Emily touched on, there are really lovely examples currently of volunteering delivering really strong outcomes for volunteers around skills development, career change, kind of new work opportunities. But this at the moment is kind of a minority of volunteers, and actually tends to be that kind of younger demographic. So there is an opportunity to build more opportunities in this area, to encourage a kind of younger demographic to volunteer, but also to think about ways to bolster the sector's workforce, particularly around kind of health and social care. So this could be around like a skills focused pathway, or it might be thinking about kind of service users then becoming volunteers and then, you know, experts by experience, and looking at how to better support them. The third opportunity area is about reimagining volunteering to include like varied forms of active citizenship in communities. So as has already been kind of touched on, and I think there's a lot of kind of knowledge about this in the sector, but it's coming through more and more strongly, is that people already contribute to their communities in many meaningful ways, but they don't always consider it to be volunteering. So they might be doing something to help a grassroots sports team, they might be delivering shopping for their neighbour or helping at a schools event, and they have, you know, the energy of kind of community spirit and active citizenship are very much there, but people don't necessarily think of themselves as volunteers. So what can the sector do to think more broadly in a more kind of flexible and informal way and a more inclusive way about what volunteering actually is, in order to widen out participation, to include a kind of broader demographic of people, and to ultimately kind of make volunteering kind of fit for purpose in today's world, where there are such a kind of broad and varied number of kind of opportunities and ways to get involved with your community. And the fourth and final opportunity area is around building strategic partnerships with the private sector. So we did see some examples of this and some examples of corporate volunteering happening in Somerset, but it seems to be a kind of largely kind of underutilized opportunity. But there is a potential there to kind of for it to strengthen the volunteer ecosystem, and particularly if it's quite kind of embedded in the area and with kind of private sector organizations, there could be opportunities for more like employer supported volunteering, more kind of partnerships with businesses where volunteering forms part of that, as well as kind of fundraising and other support. So certainly some examples there that are working really well and something to be built upon. So those are the four key opportunity areas we've identified. But as I said, we'll have an opportunity to discuss those a bit later. But that's the research. I think I'm handing back over to Gethin.
You are. Thank you, Steph, and thank you, Emily. That was a wonderful introduction to the research, a really, really valuable journey through everything that you found. There's some great grounding there. There's some emojis coming up on the screen as well, so I think people really appreciate it. Thank you ever so much. We're going to get into some of the detail shortly, but I loved so much of that, in particular some of that positive, sustaining cycle of give and take that you identified through volunteering. I think that's exactly what Catherine was articulating earlier in terms of where volunteering adds value and how it generates new value as well. And she's absolutely right, there's evidence behind this as well. There's a well-being cycle of communities that was put together by the What Work Centre for Wellbeing a few years ago, which talks about exactly that kind of premise. So loads of positives there. Let's get into a conversation with our panel now about what we've just heard, and perhaps some of the elements that are just missing as well. If I could just have the next slide on screen, please, so people can see the panel. Quick opportunity to test. We have everyone in the room and mics are working before we go in. So just to introduce you briefly, delighted to welcome back Catherine, Spark Somerset's Chief Exec. Catherine, is your mic working? Are you there?
I am, and hopefully it is. Yes.
Lovely. That's great. We have a Catherine. This is a valuable technical check, I assure you. Delighted to bring in my colleague Ruth as well. Ruth, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Thanks ever so
Good.
much, Ruth. That's
morning.
Wonderful. And then we're also absolutely delighted that Mel is joining us as well. Mel Merrill. Mel is Head of Volunteering at St Margaret's Hospice and also a trustee with Spark Somerset. Mel, thank you for being here. Can you see and hear us okay? Can we hear you?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, so we've got Catherine, we've got Ruth, and we've got Mel with us on the panel. I'm going to try and guide us through some questions based around what Wonder have shared with us, and we've also got sort of hanging on in case we need a bit of help with some of this stuff. Steph and Emily from Wonder, who are going to be a little bit like Dictionary Corner in Countdown. I think we're going to kind of come to them for adjudication if we need them, or maybe line judges at Wimbledon. That's a bit more kind of current, isn't it? Really. So we may well draw on them for that kind of role. But we're going to frame our conversation around those three areas of risk really that Wonder identified and sort of dig into them a little bit. So let's set the scene. The first one I'd like to talk about is this question of are we too reliant on an aging group of volunteers? Is there a sustainability challenge for us here? We heard loads in Wonder's research about the positives that we have to draw on, very committed levels of volunteering, highly valued by organisations, but also this concern that we might be too reliant on a core group of volunteers. Do we need to do something to bring a new generation in? Ruth, I'm going to come to you first. Nationally, and working with groups across the country, I think we hear versions of this challenge all over the place, really. Volunteering is changing, motivations, expectations and boundaries are changing for those volunteers. The national vision for volunteering that you're deeply involved with is really an attempt to help the volunteering sector sort of meet those challenges of what's changing. What do we know, do you think, about this civic core group in terms of how it's changing? What does it look like from your perspective?
Thank you. And I think there's a couple of things to reflect on when we use the term civic core. I think it was originally created to reflect those volunteers that were doing more than one activity, and that's something we can definitely see happening a lot. Apparently 3/10 of the adult population across the whole of the UK account for 3/4 of the volunteering that happens across the whole of the UK. The majority of those people, yes, are the ones that fall into the over 65 demographic, but not all of them. I think something to think about with the older and younger conversations is around the thing that Catherine touched on earlier, the formal and the informal elements. The latest community life research does demonstrate that younger people are less likely to be getting involved in formal volunteering, but are predominantly more likely to be involved in what we've been terming the informal volunteering. And a lot of that is not just about a light touch micro volunteering activity, although that is part of it. It's also as much around being able to shape the solution to the problems that they're seeing in their own communities. Okay. I think that's all really, really important to start thinking about how we're finding opportunities for those younger people to be genuinely involved in everything.
A different set of needs and expectations, perhaps. Thanks, Ruth. That's really valuable. Mel, can I come to you next? I'd love to know what this kind of question about sustainability and whether we're over-reliant on a core group of volunteers looks and feels like from your perspective in the hospice sector. Do you recognise this kind of challenge, or just take the opportunity to tell us about the composition of your volunteers and what's going on for them currently?
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, there are a consistent core of volunteers who will even admit to themselves of being over relied on, and that we need to diversify because they're not going to be around forever. Now, they openly talk to us about that as well. But we do have, I think for us at the hospice, and I think because we deliver health and care services, support services. We work with clients. There is a tendency for particularly the work that we do to have a required a bit more regularity, possibly not as flexible as we'd like because of the continuity that we need with, you know, working with some of the individuals that we work with. However, what we do notice is that we do have quite a lot of people who come to us, obviously through word of mouth, through the existing volunteer base, and what we're starting to see is an increase in the younger demographic coming through to the hospice, particularly to sort of gain what I say is school work experience, Duke of Edinburgh, you know, sort of that volunteer to career, that skills-based opportunities that I think is possibly they're not being able to access as easily or readily as they could. And I think for us, what we recognise is that we have this very large pool of volunteers. We have just over 1,000 volunteers. I would say about possibly, you know, a good sort of 60% are probably over the age of 65. We do need to think about doing things differently. So we are working with a lot of other organisations out there to sort of broaden that volunteering participation, and to work through with others to promote volunteering and work with them to create opportunities within our hospice environment, because we're not necessarily the experts at bringing in young people or people with learning disabilities. So we do and are trying to work more closely with other organisations to help us to do that.
Thanks, Mel. I mean, that's a fascinating picture in itself, really. I was struck when Steph and Emily described a couple of different types of volunteers, a couple of different personas, if you like, that they'd picked up in their research, some that were perhaps more drawn to volunteering for purpose and connection, and some that had that sort of skills angle or personal development or personal growth. It sounds like you have both of those kind of within your volunteering cohort. And you talked about younger volunteers. Catherine, there's quite a lot of talk in the chat about you know, how to bring new generations in, even in sort of larger volunteering programs like the one Mel is responsible for. Do you hear that from other partners or other members as you go around the county? Are other organisations talking about the need to bring a new generation through?
Oh, absolutely. And I think obviously in many ways we have to be really honest about the fact that it reflects the demographics of Somerset, because we do have an older demographic, so we need to be realistic about what we can achieve. But I think there's a real need for us to grasp this as a strategic issue. There are some organisations who are brilliant at it, who are engaging young people, and I think what the situation reflects is what was talked about earlier in the research, that actually many organisations struggle to recruit but don't have the capacity to think differently, to support volunteers. And actually the approach that's needed for younger people is quite different. You know, it requires a lot of thought. It requires a different strategy in terms of recruitment and support. And I think there are simply many organisations simply haven't got the headspace. They'd really love to do it, but I think they need a bit of support. And so I think that's what I think this vision conversation is about, is there something we can do, some kind of programme that we can kind of develop collectively that can support those organisations on that journey, because it isn't easy. I think what you do when you're really hard pressed is you keep going with what you already know, and I think we need to do something quite fundamentally different. I think there's also something here around really encouraging some of the particularly smaller organisations around the value of engaging young people, because it feels too hard. Quite often they're quite transient positions, and actually there's a huge benefit in terms of the added value it brings to your organisation of working with younger volunteers. And I think that's a bit of an education piece as well.
Absolutely. And that tension, the knowledge that some change is probably needed in our programs, but how to sort of manage that within the resources that you have, that feels like a challenge across the country at the moment. We're going to come to that a little bit in the next question. But before we do, Ruth, let's kind of sum up this challenge a little bit, really. So we're all acknowledging in slightly different ways the need for perhaps a new generation, perhaps a highlight on bringing younger volunteers through. You talked about how their motivations are changing. What do we know about perhaps groups that aren't on our radar at the moment, the people that don't recognise themselves as volunteers or use that language, but would see themselves as people that like to contribute to their community. This is a big sort of area of exploration for many of us in volunteering at the moment. How can we start to think about those that we're not currently engaging?
I think to answer the question about what we know is that we don't know very much about the group of people, probably unsurprisingly, but this was the finding in the Wonder research that really resonated the most with me, that opportunity to be able to be thinking about people who already are doing things in the what we'd use as a verb for volunteering, but either don't use and in some cases don't like the noun volunteer to describe what we're doing. And I think the way of looking at volunteering in the future is really how do we get to hear from people who are already doing that kind of participation. I think a lot of that needs to be around making sure we're not pigeonholing people and being where people need to be and enabling what they're already doing rather than trying to put people into a box and make them fit into the areas that we're doing. There's a lot of already self-led volunteering groups out there everywhere, not just in Somerset, but there are a lot in Somerset. There's definitely been some recent evidence from the Reach platform that actually that is a growing area. The Reach platform, which advertises for volunteering roles, is seeing an increase in people looking to volunteer and being able to create volunteering opportunities. So I think that's definitely something that we want to be looking at as we develop a vision, is how do we enable, given the constraints that we've already mentioned on people who are involved with volunteers, how do we enable that conversation with people who want to make that difference in their community to be able to bring them forward. I think it might also, just very quickly on the subject, a lot of the volunteering that's happening across the whole of the UK is in fairly prosperous areas, so that might be an element of where we're hearing from people and how are we trying to reach out more widely using community development type approaches to groups that we're not already hearing from as a sector as a whole.
Okay, thank you. So we are seeing some growth in some areas of volunteering, and perhaps some of those clues that you gave us there around, flexibility and autonomy and appealing to people's values and allowing them to shape volunteering as much as possible on their terms can kind of help us. Let's go into the second area of risk now. This is more around the challenges for hosts of volunteers, for volunteer involving organisations, needing more volunteers, but perhaps lacking a little bit of capacity to support them. We heard a little bit in the research about volunteers feeling overstretched, quite demanding roles. Sometimes organisations don't have everything they need to, pay sufficient attention to their well-being or do as much as they would like to in that kind of area. Mel, can I come to you first? You run a big volunteering operation there by the sound of it. So what do you think of this challenge? Is this just a sort of perennial issue that organisations have to cope with, the balance of resources and kind of care for volunteers? Or are there more creative ways we could approach this?
It's an interesting one, and I'll probably come at a different angle here. So at St Margaret's, we probably have in the region of around 350 staff. Of around 150 of those are responsible for either coordinating, managing or supervising volunteer teams or volunteers. But that's in addition to their day job. So what we've tried to do, we hear quite a lot from our sort of staff stroke volunteer managers, as I like to refer to them, I'd like to do more, but I haven't got the time. I've got to do the day job. Patients come first, that kind of thing, which is, quite common. We hear that a lot. So it's kind of like, what can we do to support them, to help them to do the day job, but also to be able to equip them with the skills, the confidence and the capabilities to manage their volunteers well. So, for me, that's really important. And one of the things that we've adopted is we've recently centralised all our volunteer recruitment, so that our volunteer recruitment was kind of siloed in different teams, so retail, fundraising, and on the hospice hubs as well. So what we've done is, and we are a small volunteering team, I have to say, there's not masses of us at all, but we have centralised the volunteer recruitment, which takes that pressure off of the staff to be able to have to do that. But what that does bring as well for me is that consistency of recruitment, that consistency of that recruitment and onboarding experience for our volunteers. So I think that's really quite unique.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No, it's fine. It's fine. And I think also it's about, giving them the like I said, the skills and confidence to manage volunteers. Not everyone's managed volunteers before, and it's not always apparent who has and who hasn't when they, join St Margaret's as a staff member. But then suddenly managing a team of 30 volunteers. So it's about putting in an infrastructure inside the organisation to make them feel supported. We provide guidance, support. We're putting together a volunteer management essentials training course that we will sort of be rolling out across the organisation. We're currently developing a kind of volunteer management framework, which will help them to sort of not just the recruitment and sort of the onboarding experience, but also how they support and enable and nurture and develop their volunteer teams as well. And what we can see from that, hopefully, is the retention rates, because volunteers feel valued, they feel supported, they feel recognised. Hopefully that's the idea, is that our retention of our volunteers will continue, and our volunteers will obviously hopefully do more for us as well.
That's lovely. Thanks, Mel. Lots in there around what you can do from the centre, I suppose, from an infrastructure level, efficiencies for you, possibly also enhanced experience for the volunteers as well. Maybe the answers to this question lie in there. Catherine, this is a classic infrastructure question, isn't it? Really, I'm sure you've probably given quite a lot of thought to what kind of things an organisation like Spark or other bits of infrastructure could do to support the front line and take some of that pressure off. Can you give us a flavour of any of that? Where can the second tier help the front line in these areas, do you think?
Yeah, and I think it's worth kind of raising, I'm preaching to the converted here with everyone on this call, but a lot of volunteer involving organisations in Somerset are volunteer led. So essentially you've got volunteers supporting volunteers. So we are so far away from having the kind of structure that Mel talks about. And so I think there's something here around that. This is a phrase we talk about a lot, is that generous leadership. Which are the organisations that have the infrastructure? How can we work together to enable the smaller organisations to have it? Are there elements of infrastructure that can be held centrally? Are there elements of training and safeguarding support that can be held centrally? We've been having a conversation with some of the smaller organisations, even around things like supervision, particularly when they're dealing with really complex individuals, that you've got a volunteer who's on the front line and actually really needs some kind of quite significant emotional support to deal with some of the challenges that they're facing, and there is nothing. So I think that is absolutely part of this conversation here, is kind of recognizing where is the infrastructure, because for me it's not about infrastructure for infrastructure's sake. It's about the fact that actually we're letting many of these volunteers down if we don't have some of this stuff. It's really important because it's about keeping them safe. It's about making them feel supported. It's about making them feel that the buck doesn't stop with them, because for many of them, they feel that it does. They feel that the responsibility lies with them and them alone. So I think it's quite an urgent requirement, I think, for us to think about this, because, as I say, I think the landscape of volunteering in Somerset is quite different to other areas, in that it is very grassroots, it is very volunteer led, and that brings enormous kind of benefits, and kind of, it's hugely flexible and wonderful, and it reflects those communities, but actually it brings real challenges as well. So I think this is very much about what is the infrastructure that we can kind of enable that could be available to a range of organisations, because they're not going to be able to build it for themselves.
Can be difficult to join up, I suppose, when it's grassroots like that, I suppose. And this idea of collaboration can feel a bit challenging or a bit competitive sometimes in volunteering. But I think it's encouraging us to get into the mindset that these aren't our volunteers particularly, but we as hosts are enablers of them doing brilliant things in their community. And
I think there's a quick point, actually. I think, I was in a meeting at the end of last week where we were meeting with youth work organisations, and I think there are some very kind of pressing needs kind of for organisations around their sustainability. So this is not just about sharing resources or doing things together because it's best for volunteering. Actually, I think there are some real needs around sustainability and funding pressures as well. So I think there's a whole host of reasons why now is the time to kind of have these conversations around more collaborative working.
And the good news, I think, is that there are really nice examples from across the country where this is starting to happen. Collaboration feels like it can work really well when it's on a sort of area basis, like Somerset or a smaller local authority area. Levi, who's on the call, his platform DeedMob supports a number of local areas that do this. And so in those areas, I think it's about kind of creating a culture of volunteering where, yes, individuals care about you and your cause and your charity, but they're also invested in their local area. And they might do a number of things. Takes us back to Wonder's insight around 67% of volunteers doing 2 or more roles. It's not that we're agnostic on cause, but there's a lot of giving out there, and can infrastructure sort of support that better? Ruth, I'd love to know if any of this looked different to you from a national perspective from your Macmillan days, because as well as local infrastructure like councils, voluntary service like Spark, we also in this country have national charities with local branch structures federated or aligned in some way. You played that sort of role at the centre of Macmillan with lots of local branches. Are there things that we can take from the national level about how the local is supported, do you think?
I think one of the good examples from the Macmillan level isn't necessarily a branch structure, but is in the way that Macmillan recognising it couldn't be everywhere for everybody in its own entity, but would be able to fund other organisations in a local community and then give resources such as helping on understanding volunteer management, helping with safeguarding, helping on all those. And I really like that model of a larger, better resourced organisation. Absolutely working with smaller organisations as partners, not as a top-down model, to be able to think about how we're learning. But certainly a lot of other organisations like MS Society, which is a place I'm currently supporting at the moment, is working really hard on how can we better support local volunteer-led branches and groups in our area to ensure that they've got all the skills that they need to do that. And part of that is also looking as an organisation, and possibly one can do that as a place, but what exactly is needed? What are the safeguarding rules that we absolutely all do need to put in place to keep people safe, and how much of it is because an organisation feels it's very risk averse rather than risk aware? So I think an infrastructure space could be thinking about what is absolutely essential for safeguarding elements and what is more of a bureaucratic area. So I think that's part of the changing culture to explore.
I mean, and thank you. That's a lovely example of the kind of questions that come up when people consider passporting and those kind of areas, isn't it? What are the areas of training that we all have in common? Could we harmonise that for a smoother experience? What's the quality assurance that we all want to see on a really good quality volunteering experience for people? Can we agree some shared standards? Perhaps these are areas for us, perhaps not. That's for us to decide on this vision. We're coming up to our break. I want to make up time a little bit, so we're going to have just a very kind of quick 1 or 2 lines from each of us on the final question, really. So a little bit quick fire. Final area of risk was around this, and it builds on our last point, lack of collaboration in a fragmented system. To remind us what Wanda said, most organisations want to work more collaboratively, share knowledge and ease the volunteer journey, but the system is currently quite fragmented. Structural challenges, attitudinal barriers, competition for funding, mismatch of resources between larger and smaller organisations, lots of things in there. Mel, collaboration, you mentioned it earlier in one of your answers. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? What kind of areas do you think are suitable for you to collaborate with others on?
Well, I'm kind of, that's another really interesting question, actually, because I think for me, it's sometimes, particularly in Somerset, you kind of don't know necessarily who's out there, what organisations are out there, what groups are out there and what they do. So sometimes I think it's just a case of, making yourself available, reaching out to people through their other networks and just go, tell me about yourself. Let's explore, let's chat, let's see what falls out of our conversations, because sometimes those are the most enriching conversations, when you don't really know what you're looking for, but you do find those like threads through, which are woven through your organizations, which I think is really, really exciting. And I think that's great. I think for me, particularly, what we find, sometimes we are more volunteer led in order our approach to an organisation. So, for example, if a young volunteer comes in, or somebody, or anybody comes in, and they might have a support need that we don't necessarily know how to support that need best, we will reach out to an organisation, and then that's how we kind of develop that pathway and that pipeline through supporting and engaging with those organisations. So I think that's always a really good route through as well.
Lovely. Thanks, Mel. And yes, absolutely. Often there's just value in a kind of conversation about what this challenge is and how we frame it. What's that phrase about, a problem well defined is a problem half solved already, something like that. Ruth, Mel was talking about lots of things that that sounded familiar from the national level, really. I'm thinking about things like the Shaping the Future group that come together to debate shared challenges they're having on their volunteering programs and see if there's appetite for moving forward. Have you come across anything by way of national collaborations, perhaps in vision or other areas, that might be useful to highlight here for us?
And you've referred to some of the conversations about passporting earlier, Gethin, in your comment on the last question. I think there's something really interesting. So certainly there were 3 national charities, St John's, British Red Cross and RVS, that did work really closely to begin to look at the onboarding and the shared opportunities to make sure that volunteers with a similar interest and a similar cause could be getting involved. I think there's a couple of other things, as well as some of the larger groups. Vision for Volunteering itself is a partnership between organisations and thinking about how we bring in voices of different people and support and enable them. But there's also that element of standardising data. Shaping the Future is already standardising some of the questions that people send out in their volunteering satisfaction survey. So there's a bit of an idea of understanding about that broader needs to develop some improved experience. And there's a piece of work that is being looked at by Nottingham Trent University on data and understanding, having a shared data sharing opportunities. And one of the things they're exploring at the moment is having a question systems bank. And I think that might be something that'd be useful to start looking at as part of a vision, is how could we have a place-based opportunity to explore the kind of systems that are asked, whether you're a small charity, a charity with no staff, a hospital, a GP, etc., so that we're getting that kind of offer. And I just wanted to very quickly add, because I was really struck by looking at building relationships into business, that one of the things that Macmillan again also did quite successfully was to work with their corporate sponsors, such as Costa Coffee, where they would link and host cancer champion people being able to get together and supported by volunteers meetings in there, and actually start hosting them and playing volunteering roles as well. So I think that's when we could start thinking creatively about the broader community, including businesses and the corporates within our community.
I mean, wow, thank you. There's loads in there. So colleagues on the call today, participants, this is how you can use Ruth and I. If there are examples of things from elsewhere that you'd like to explore for Somerset, oh yes, we'd love a version of that. That's the kind of thing that we might pick up in our one-to-ones or think about when developing the whole vision. Thank you, Ruth, that's wonderful. Catherine, just to come to you finally to kind of close off, and without wanting to sort of, prejudice the conversation that's coming, but are there any instincts that you have for collaboration that you'd like people to think about in the room, or anything you'd like to leave people with just as we kind of go into the break?
I think it's just following on from what I was saying before around kind of understanding the landscape in Somerset. So there are quite a few bigger organisations, and there are kind of people who are regional representatives or local representatives of bigger organisations. And I think there's not a one size fits all for collaboration, is there? And so whatever approach we need to take, we need to think about the sector in Somerset and their needs. I mentioned earlier about the Volunteer Coordinator Forum. Even at that we run regularly, it's about peer support and opportunities for learning. The needs of the organisations are so vastly different. So whatever approach we decide to take here, well, there isn't one approach, I've already said that. I think, but what we need to do is we need to really be incredibly inclusive in our vision and think about the relative needs of the different sizes of organisations. There'll be some wonderful stuff that's going on nationally with some of the big nationals that could be brilliant for a number of organisations in Somerset, but for many it won't be relevant. So it's just about kind of paying attention to that as we go along, because I think there's a real risk that collaborate. We're seeing that the whole time. There's a real risk that kind of collaborative working is a real barrier for those smaller organisations,
Sure.
and they are the mainstay of our sector in Somerset. We can't leave them out.
We've just been through Small Charity Week, haven't we, nationally, and that disparity is highlighted kind of brilliantly by that campaign. Okay, so a level playing field, if collaboration is going to be a pillar of this vision that we try and take forward. Panel, thank you so much, Catherine, Mel and Ruth. That was really, really rich. Emily and Steph, I'm so sorry we didn't come to you. Maybe we'll leave you with the countdown conundrum as we go into the break now, and we can sort of solve it as we go. We're going to leave it there. We're going to take a quick break. We're slightly over time, but let's take 5 minutes, go and get a cup of tea, comfort break, and we'll come back here at about 20 past for a quick go into round 2 for the afternoon. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you very, very shortly. Ruth, would you like to kick us off and tell us a little bit about the national vision?
Yes, please. I think someone's driving the slide. Thank you very much. If you could go on to the next slide. I don't want to spend too much time because the most important thing is to hear from all of you, but there's a variety of ways of thinking about a vision, which is a big unifying framework for everybody to get behind, people involving volunteers, wider systems, other stakeholders. I think it's valuable to think about how do we describe that shared intention for all of us working on this vision for Somerset. So one of the things that the vision for volunteering as an England-wide picture was to look at it thematically, to think about what are the key themes that we know we want to be exploring. So you can see them there on the slide. There are things around awareness, and power and equity, collaboration and experimentation. But to be able to have that element as a theme doesn't mean you have to follow them exactly, but think about this as a starter for a conversation is how we were positioning the vision for volunteering as a UK-wide element. But there are lots of different examples across the country, and we don't have to do it in one particular way. I think that's one of the joys. With the next slide, please. But I think one of some of the things we wanted to do in the UK, in the England vision, was to think about what future do we want to see by 2032. What will the experience to be a volunteer look like? How are we going to be showing the recognition that came up in the chat earlier to volunteers? How are we going to be sharing the power with people, whether they call themselves volunteers or not? How are we going to work in those ways? So that's one of the things that we really wanted to project forward into the future. How is it that the world will be for volunteering? So I think as we go through the rest of the exercise, Gethin's going to give you some examples of some local. And before we do that, really have that vision in the back of your mind about what is that perfect future we want to get to for volunteering within Somerset. What would that future that you want to be, and bring those into the conversations. I think that would be valuable. So I'm going to hand back to Gethin, who's got some examples of other local visions that might be inspiring for you.
Thanks, Ruth. And if I could channel my inner Chris Whitty and have the next slide, please, that's wonderful. So yes, some visions, as Ruth said, are quite thematic and aspirational and future focused and designed to be quite permissive and for you to adapt locally. Some of them are a little bit more prescriptive. Here are a few that we thought were kind of quite interesting. Norfolk's is quite a useful one to kind of look at, really. Big county, mostly rural, quite like ours. They also have a volunteering for health project, so a lot of their focus in volunteering is in health and care. And it's really quite a broad strategic focus around strengthening communities through volunteering. Volunteering is a medium for that kind of challenge, and their objectives are quite wide-ranging, actually. They're probably quite reflective of lots of things we've been talking about today. Recognition for volunteers is really big, and it's in there. Being more inclusive is in there. Resources, there's a big section on that, and quite a lot about pathways into employment through volunteering as well. So as they say in their own words here, Norfolk's at a crossroads, an urgent need to look at things differently, work together as partners and stakeholders, and build more inclusive and capable communities. Does that kind of approach resonate with you? Food for thought. Oxfordshire's is quite nice in that it's based around 10 core principles, and they're all very volunteer facing, include everyone, keep it personal, create space for experimentation, kind of touch points designed to give anyone invested in volunteering a bit of a framework or a kind of testing ground for their ideas. We could do this, but does that really help us with the flexibility challenge? Where's the enjoyment angle on this? All of these things are important for the volunteer, and I think there's a sense in Oxfordshire's vision that if we get the volunteering experience right, then amazing things will follow from that, and that's their route into some of these challenges. And then finally, just for comparison, London's vision is probably more of a traditional kind of policy approach. They did a deep inquiry into what volunteering was needed across lots of sectors, came up with 36 recommendations. So it was sort of a policy-based report point of view, and those recommendations now give an agenda for London for different stakeholders to take forward. So we could have a vision that is quite prescriptive and really kind of nails out the challenges that we've got and maybe put some targets against them, but it's by no means the only way in which these things are done. So just some options there. Do you like one of those or combinations of, or perhaps it's something entirely new? It's up to us. We'll get there. Next slide, please. So we're going to move into breakout groups now. They're going to be themed around the 4 areas of opportunity that Wanda highlighted for us earlier. We've got about 7 groups, I think, or so. So you're going to be randomly assigned. You don't have a choice, I'm afraid. We're just going to kind of put you into groups, but each will have a facilitator and we'll take you through a series of questions. It's just coming up to past, so I think we'll do this for a maximum of about 20 minutes, and then we'll come back together with about 10 minutes to go before noon and just share a few headlines and wrap up. So if everyone's okay, I'm going to ask our colleague Bryony to send us off magically into different corners of the internet now, and we'll come back together shortly. Thank you, everyone. We had quite a lot of groups, so I didn't think we probably had time for huge rounds of feedback, but I'm wondering whether any of my facilitators wanted to make a point or share a really great insight that kind of came out of their conversation. Maybe raise your hands if so, and then we can kind of come in. I'll start us off with one, I think. I was involved in the collaboration group, and we were talking about how to collaborate with volunteers and how to collaborate between organizations as well. And one of the nice things that came out of the volunteer side was the idea that involving volunteers in conversations about how we do things and how we design services or how we run our organizations is also a sort of really good form of recognition, because we're sort of recognizing their expertise in the process, the insights that they have to bring. So many of us will probably have a recognition program of sorts or have thoughts about how we recognize volunteers. Sometimes that's formal, like award ceremony. Sometimes it's informal, a simple thank you. But actually involving volunteers in your processes can be a really nice way of building a culture of volunteering through recognition as well. Maybe there are some ideas there. I can't see everyone's screen, but does anybody kind of want to come in? Lindsay, do you want to make a point? Thank you for being here. What would you like to share?
Hi, Gethin. Yes, I was leading the other collaboration, facilitating the other collaboration group, which is fantastic. Okay. Thank you. And I think there was a sort of a theme that kept coming out of it, and that's in terms of collaboration. Certainly, some smaller organisations don't necessarily see the value in it to them, and okay. I suppose making that clearer. And also, Kate talked about the Skillshare initiative that we are piloting at the moment is a way. It might be a really nice way for organisations to sort of dip their toe in, as it were, into that sort of micro volunteering to see the benefit and grow that culture. And we also talked a lot about just in terms of the role we can play in terms of new projects being born collaborative, as Kate said. If it's there from the beginning as an expectation that you are going to be collaborative, who you're going to collaborate with, what are you going to do, then it will sort of embed that.
I love that. Born collaborative. That almost feels like a sort of guiding design principle or something, doesn't it? Collaboration is one of the big themes of the national vision, of course, which Ruth is heavily involved in. Thank you, Lindsay. That's wonderful. Jenny, can we come to you next? What came out of your discussions?
So we were the group that was talking around kind of reimagining volunteering, and I think we had a really rich conversation and some really great examples of kind of what's happened where and ideas. But I think the main thing that really came out for it from us was around making sure that the volunteer is at the heart of all of the things that you do. Don't create the role and hope that people will come, find the volunteer and then create something that suits them, that they want to do, that they're involved in, that they're enthusiastic about and that they're engaged with. And I think one of the people in our group kind of said, you know, volunteer energy flows often around the volunteer rather than through the volunteer. And like I say, really making sure that actually whatever you are wanting, whatever support you might need, that you're really focusing on that volunteer, their motivations, their interests, their skills, and then finding hopefully something to suit them rather than just expecting a really formal, rigid job description, for want of a better word, and assuming that someone will come and fill it.
That's lovely. Starting with the volunteer sounds like a very strengths-based approach, which feels very relevant in volunteering a lot at the moment. Starting with where they are. Thank you, Jenny. That's wonderful. Laura, tell us a bit about your discussions.
So I was in the building strategic partnerships with the private sector. We sort of discussed one of the biggest challenges in corporate volunteering is ensuring that sort of the right skills meet the community needs at the right time. So we sort of talked about perhaps leveraging digital skill matching platforms, or sort of online tools designed to sort of continuously connect professional expertise of corporate employees with emerging needs within the VCFSE organisations. Just sort of this potentially sort of reduce the time spent manually sort of searching for suitable volunteers or projects and speeding up the connection process.
Lovely. Okay, so digital solutions for that brokerage and that tech bit. I think you're probably right. Corporates have quite a lot in common with modern volunteers in that they, you know, once the mood is there, you need to just strike while the iron's hot, and if there's an appetite for it, you need to find something that's right for them. Thanks, Laura. That's great. We've hit 3 of the 4 areas of opportunity so far. I wonder if we're going to hit skills-focused pathways at some point. Steph looks promising. Steph, was that the one that you were invited? It was fantastic. There you go. If you're playing bingo, then we can cross the cards off now. Steph, why don't you share some of what came up for you?
Yeah, I think something that came up for us was really building on Jenny's point, actually, about when we're thinking about kind of recruiting volunteers and thinking about from the very start of their journey, sometimes the temptation can be to kind of almost make them generalists and go, okay, do all the possible training and all these kind of different, be able to kind of leap into lots of different roles, maybe versus being like, actually, if someone is really good at something, or, you know, could they specialize more? Is there an opportunity for kind of accreditation? Is there opportunities to kind of build that kind of specialism from the start, even in smaller organizations?
Oh, lovely. Okay. So, and that's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think once we get them into role, volunteers a lot of the time, maybe the temptation is to think, well, that's it, and we've done our job now. But kind of progression and development and keeping it fresh for the volunteer, or figuring out where else they might want to contribute, can be a really great way of sustaining their energy and motivation for the cause. Thanks, Steph. Great insight. Catherine, which group were you, or which area were you looking at in your group?
I was building partnerships as well, so private sector. And I think in our group, I think there was a real sense that it's a bit of a missed opportunity. So we talked about the fact that there was one organisation, particularly in our group, so School in a Bag, who do lots, but we were talking about the fact that increasingly lots of businesses have volunteering days, so 1 or 2 days a year, and what's happening is there's actually a really small pool of organizations that can accommodate that, because they tend to want to do a full day. It tends to be stuff like painting the wall, like Levi's just said, or a community garden, and actually the vast majority of community organizations miss out on that opportunity. So we were talking about the fact that, again, I think we need to reimagine that as well, completely separately. So it's about thinking, there's a bit of an education, hearts and minds piece with businesses around why this could help you, why this matters to your people that you work with, how it can help embed them in the community, how it can help them connect. And then we talked about it needs to be a much more of an equal match. So it's about what are the needs of the organisations, what are the needs of the individuals, and make that match. So we talked about Skillshare, of course. We talked also about skills exchange. That's something that Belinda mentioned. So that actually the Skillshare is both ways. It's about the people within the private sector gaining skills from community organisations as well. You know, there's definitely two-way kind of opportunities here. And we also said as well around kind of recognizing that we need to make it really, really easy. So I think there are safeguarding and kind of training barriers for this one-off kind of volunteering. So I think it's about us thinking about longer term opportunities for partnership with the private sector, because it feels like that's where a lot of the energy feels to be at the moment. There's a real move. So we did, without wishing to take too much time, but we did an event with the Chamber of Commerce a couple of weeks ago, really well attended. There are loads of organisations out there who are absolutely chomping at the bit to work with local organisations in a very different way. So I think, but it will require some energy in terms of capacity to make that happen.
Yeah, sure. So, but really encouraging to hear that there is energy and appetite there and demand. So, colleagues, collectively, if we feel that working closer with the private sector is a good way to try and bring more people into the volunteering ecosystem, if you like, or just into our world generally, then what's our offer to them? And what does this vision need to do to speak to them in a language where they can engage? Really interesting points. Kirsty, final one possibly. Which group were you in?
Sorry, I just wanted to come in and add on to the corporates question.
Oh, please.
Sorry,
so
ahead.
I'm
not a group, but just have short, we're conscious of time. So a lot of the kind of corporate donors that we're engaging with, we're finding that they are wanting to do more now. It's more than just giving money. They're really looking and wanting to engage in those charities that they're supporting. And so we're kind of, I guess, giving that bridge as well. And, you know, if we could do more of that, that would also be fantastic. Thank you.
No, thank you, Kirsty. And that is a really helpful reminder. The private sector often has an idea about giving, doesn't it? Which would probably include volunteering, but maybe not start and stop at that. They may be thinking about goods or services that they can donate, and they may be thinking about financial donations as well. Some platforms in volunteering kind of try to cater for all of those, but maybe volunteering as part of a wider way in which your cause can be supported is something that this vision needs to speak to. Okay, I think we're getting towards the end of our time with you, and we want to kind of leave you in kind of good time here. Bryony, I don't know if we could have the sort of the penultimate slide with some close and next steps, if that's possible. And if any colleagues from Spark need to sort of make any announcements or parish notices before we leave the call, by all means, kind of come in, raise your hand, and we'll manage that. But just to sort of leave you with some kind of closing thoughts on behalf of kind of Ruth and I mainly. Hopefully you've heard this message loud and clear already, but today is a call to arms, and we want to know how this vision can work for your particular needs in volunteering and your particular perspectives. So in July and August, Ruth and I will hopefully do a bit of a remote roadshow and want to come and meet with you and speak with you and kind of hear what you have to say about this vision. If you'd like to be involved in that, we have an expression of interest form, a short form that you can complete to say yes please, and then we'll get in touch with you and find a time that's kind of convenient. If we're not sending that out in the chat today, then we will very, very soon. It'll come with the slides that come after today. So book us for a conversation if you'd like to. And then some other versions of that offer, really. If you're involved in wider networks or groups or meetings in volunteering or perhaps in another thematic area, but volunteering feels important, ask us and we'd love to kind of come to that meeting and share a little bit of background on the vision and maybe do a bit of a kind of collective focus group. That would be a great way for us to hit multiple perspectives in one. And then finally, last but not least, as well as yourselves and people with interests and stakes in volunteering, we also need to hear from volunteers themselves and the wider public as well. So if you're, again, running anything with wider groups within the community or with a kind of community focus, and you think this would be a great opportunity to hear about what they might want from volunteering and how we can make their experience a bit more better, a bit smoother, a bit more inclusive and accessible, then again, please let us know. I think the expression of interest form is probably the way to do all of those, really. So you can kind of flag that with us when we have that kind of conversation. But otherwise, I think that's probably it from Ruth and I, and we hope you found today really valuable for starting to think about these things. Colleagues from Spark, is there anything you'd like to say by way of closing or kind of housekeeping before we let people go? Catherine?
Just that Nina's put some comments in a comment in the chat as well. So if you wanted to get in contact with us, if you've got any other questions, please do get in touch and support that. But really, I just wanted to thank you guys. I wanted to thank everyone for coming. So it's really brilliant to have everyone here. Really appreciate it. And obviously a special thanks to Gethin and to Ruth as well, and to Emily and Steph for kind of providing such engaging content, and to our panel members as well, to Elle as well. Thank you very much. And as I say, just to reiterate, this is just the start. So please do get in touch. There's going to be 4 more ways to engage, but pick up the phone, send us a message. We want to hear from you so that we can really co-produce this vision. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine. And yes, to reiterate that, thanks ever so much for being here, everyone. There's going to be real momentum behind this for the next few months. And this is our opportunity to do something quite radical and important for volunteering in Somerset. Please do get involved. But thank you very much for your time today. And hopefully we'll see many of you over the summer, but if not, definitely in the autumn for that launch and celebration further down the line. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your days.